The wind had no mercy on the Llano Estacado. It was a knife, sharpened on the high plains, and it cut through the thin canvas of his coat as if it were muslin. Tawa sat his horse, a grulla gelding that stood like a stone, indifferent to the cold. The moon was a sliver, a chip of ice in a black sky, offering just enough light to make the shadows long and deep. From the south, so faint it was more a vibration in the chest than a sound, came the drums, the people, his people, celebrating the spring feast at the Allied camp. It was a sound he had not joined in 15 years. Then, from the east, came the other sound, a high, thin scream that tore the night. The iron horse, it was the needle of the new age, stitching the land together with steel, and Tawa felt it pricked his own skin. He had left the warpath when the treaty was signed, had watched the world he knew fold up like a worn blanket. He was 40 years old, and for 15 of those years, he had lived alone. He was James Tawa to the men at the post office, the name they used on their pay vouchers. To himself, he was just Tawa, and he was tired. He gathered his reins, the leather stiff and cold against his palms. The grulla shifted, waiting for the command. He turned the horse not toward the drums, but toward the cluster of weak lights miles off. Red Ford. His life was a circle, small and tight. He worked his string of horses, breaking them, trading them, keeping the best for himself. He scouted for the bi-monthly mail coach, the one that sometimes brought the women, the mail-order brides. He led them through the territory, his face a mask, his silence a wall they could not breach. He had seen their hopeful, terrified faces. He had watched them delivered like parcels. It was not his business. He took the pay, bought his cornmeal and coffee, and returned to his dugout by the dry creek bed. Peace, it was a strange word. He had it, this silence, this solitude, this ache in his bones. This was peace. It had cost him everything. It had cost him the woman who had made the world make sense, the one who had died in the treaty camp not from a bullet meant for a warrior, but from a white-hot piece of metal fired by a drunken cavalryman celebrating the end of hostilities. Peace. He rode into Red Ford as the sun was thinking about rising. The sky was gray, the color of ash. The town was mostly asleep. The livery was quiet, save for the nickering of his own horses in the corral he rented. He swung down, his left shoulder stiff. The cold always found the scar. It was a puckered, ugly thing, a gift from a cavalry carbine long ago. He never spoke of it. He never spoke of any of it. It was the true mark, the one that defined him, not the name the government men used. He moved through the motions of his mourning. He checked his animals, his hands sure and gentle as they ran down legs and checked hooves. His horses were his only truth. They did not lie. They did not break treaties. He fed them, filled the water trough, the repetitive work a balm to his mind. The wind was still there, whining around the corners of the raw lumber buildings. By 7 o'clock, the town was stirring. Smoke rose from the chimney of the mercantile, which also served as the post office. Tawa went inside, the small bell over the door jangling weakly. Abernathy, the postmaster, was already there, sorting a thin pile of letters. He was a small man, worried by nature, with spectacles perched on his nose. He looked up, startled, as if he had forgotten Tawa was due. "Mr. Tawa, you are early." "Coach is early," Tawa said. His voice was rough from disuse, low. Yes, so it is." Abernathy fussed with his papers. "Your pay is ready." He counted out the coin, his lips moving silently. Tawa waited, patient as the stones outside. He took the money and was about to leave. He needed cornmeal and shot from the other side of the store. "A moment, Mr. Tawa," Abernathy said, his voice a little too high. "There is a matter, a piece of freight. It arrived on the train last night, meant for the coach you are scouting today." Tawa turned. "Not my concern." "Well," It is, Abernathy insisted, flushing. That is, the paperwork is peculiar. He pushed a sheet of foolscap across the counter. Tawa looked at it. He could read the white man's words. Another skill he kept hidden when he could. It was a bill of lading, but not for goods. It was from a company, Atlantic Matrimonials. The blue ink of the company's seal was blurred, a watery smudge. And there, on the line for the recipient, was the name. It was written in a hurried, looping script. J. Tawa. Tawa stared at the name. The ink seemed to pulse. He felt the blood drain from his face, leaving his skin tight and cold. He looked from the paper to Abernathy's worried expression. This is not me, he said. His voice was flat. I assumed as much. Abernathy stammered. But you must see the problem. The name is there. And she is here. She arrived on the 9 o'clock train. Been sitting in my office since sunrise. Tawa did not move. He felt the scar on his shoulder begin to burn. A deep, familiar fire. 15 years of silence. 15 years of building a wall so high and thick no one could touch him. And now, this, a piece of paper, a mistake. He looked past Abernathy through the small, grimy window of the office. He could not see her, but he knew she was there. A human parcel. A woman. Sent across a continent. Marked for a name that looked like his. He knew who the paper was likely meant for. Jasper Tabor, a rancher with a greedy streak and a reputation for breaking things. The looping Tabor had been read as Tawa. A mistake, Tawa said again, his voice harder. A mistake the company will not rectify for weeks. Mr. Tawa, Abernathy said, wringing his hands. The telegraph line is down past Fort Worth. The coach is leaving in 1 hour. You are scouting. She has a ticket for that coach, paid for by the name on this paper. What am I to do? Tawa felt the old, cold rage begin to uncoil in his gut. The same rage he had felt when he saw the smoke from the soldier's rifle. The same rage he had swallowed for 15 years. He had made a promise to himself. He would not be part of their world. He would not be touched by their laws, their bargains, their foolish, dangerous games. He had built his peace on a foundation of emptiness, and the wind was blowing in, carrying the scream of the train and the scent of a woman from a world he did not know. He looked at the blurred seal, Atlantic Matrimonials. It looked like a smear of blood. He turned from the counter without a word. Mr. Tawa, wait, Abernathy called, his voice thin with panic. You cannot just leave. There is a woman, a passenger. Tawa stopped at the door, his hand on the rough wood. The bell was silent. He looked back, his black eyes holding the postmaster in place. I am a scout, Tawa said, each word precise. I guide the coach. I do not handle the freight. He pushed the door open. The wind met him, a cold slap in the face. But it was not as cold as the feeling in his chest. He had his pay. He had his horses. He had his solitude. And he would hold on to it. He would hold on, even as he heard the faint sound of a woman's cough from inside the postmaster's office. He walked toward the mercantile shelves, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. He would get his cornmeal. He would do his job. He would not be involved. He measured out the cornmeal, his movements economical. The sacking was rough under his fingers as he tied it off. Behind him, Abernathy was still fluttering, a moth trapped in a jar. Tawa paid the man, his coin clinking on the worn wooden counter. He was tying the bag to his saddle cinch when the sound came, a blast from a tin horn, thin and brassy on the morning air. The mail coach? Oh, heavens, Abernathy breathed, snatching his hat. They are here. She is here. Mr. Tawa, what do I say? Tawa finished his knot. You say the truth. The paper is wrong. He turned to leave, to get his horse from the livery, to ride out ahead of the coach as he was paid to do. But the street was suddenly full. The coach, a mud-splattered box of red paint and leather. thundered to a halt in a cloud of dust and brake squeal. The driver, a man named Hake, spat a stream of tobacco juice. "Got your mail? Abernathy and one parcel. Live." A few cowboys, idling outside the saloon even at this early hour, sauntered over, eager for any diversion. Reverend Miles, clutching his black-bound book, emerged from the eatery, his face set in a look of mild, professional concern. From the shadows of the boardwalk across the street, two Comanche men, in town to trade, watched with unreadable faces, and leaning against a support post of the sheriff's office, polishing a badge on his vest, was Silas Burke. He watched not the coach, but Tawa. The coach door opened. The driver offered a hand, and a woman stepped down. She was not what Tawa expected, though he was not sure what he had expected. She was small, dressed in a dark green traveling suit that must have been fine in Boston, but was now wrinkled and coated in the pale dust of the plains. Her hat was small, pinned tightly to brown hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked tired. She looked as if she had not taken a full breath in a week. But when she looked up, her back was straight. She surveyed Red Ford, her gaze moving from the saloon to the iron-barred window of Burke's office, and Tawa saw her chin lift, just a fraction. This one was not broken yet. This was Evelyn Hart. Abernathy, his face slick with sweat, hurried forward, holding the manifest and the smeared voucher. "Miss Hart, Miss Evelyn Hart, from the Atlantic Matrimonials Company." "I am," she said. Her voice was clear, crisp, an Eastern sound, like thin ice breaking. "Welcome, welcome to Red Ford." Abernathy stammered, twisting the paper. "We have your voucher, your contract for passage and marriage to..." He looked at the paper as if it were a snake. "To a Mr. J. Tawa." All motion in the street stopped. The wind, for a moment, seemed to hold its breath. Then one of the cowboys, a young man with no sense, let out a hoot. "Well, damn, Tawa, you bought one and a quiet one, too." Every eye swung to Tawa, who stood frozen by his horse. He had not moved, had not spoken. He was a statue of dust-colored canvas and quiet rage. Evelyn Hart's head snapped toward him. She looked at his long black hair, tied back with a leather strip. She looked at the hard, weathered planes of his face, the Comanche face. She looked at the worn buckskins and the government-issue coat. This was not the prosperous rancher described on paper. This was not Jasper Tabor. Her own face went pale, her lips parting in a silent word. Shock, pure and total. Reverend Miles, seeing a social disaster, bustled forward, his hands clasped. "Well, this is perhaps irregular, but the contract is clear. The lady has arrived. The groom is here." He was trying to smooth it over, to stitch the torn fabric of the morning back together. "Mr. Tawa, if you and the lady will come to the church, we can have this sanctified and proper in less than 10 minutes. "That's right, Tawa, get it over with," the cowboy yelled. "Kiss the bride." Tawa moved. He unstrapped the bag of cornmeal from his saddle. He let it drop to the dust with a soft thud. He walked forward, his steps measured, silent on the packed earth. He did not look at Evelyn. He did not look at the Reverend. He stopped in front of Abernathy and held out his hand. "The paper, Mr. Tawa, "The paper," he repeated. Abernathy gave it to him. Tawa looked at the looping script. He saw the T and the A and the B that a careless clerk had turned into a W. "The name," Tawa said, his voice flat, "is Tabor, Jasper Tabor." Evelyn let out a small gasp, a sound of confirmation, of despair. "Yes," she said, finding her voice. "Mr. Jasper Tabor. He owns a ranch. The papers said he paid my passage." Silas Burke finally pushed himself off the post. He sauntered over, his spurs ringing, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. His smile was slow, unpleasant. Well now, ain't this a predicament? He drawled, looking at Evelyn as if she were a horse. Looks like the freight got misdelivered. And Jasper, he is expecting his property. He paid good money for this one. He gestured to Evelyn. $1,000 bond to the company. He told me. She ain't property, Tawa said, his voice quiet. Burke's eyes narrowed. She is a contract. Tawa, bought and paid for. And the paper, mistake or not, was addressed to you. So what is it? Are you taking delivery, or is she vagrant? Because Red Ford does not abide vagrants, especially not unescorted ladies. The threat was clear. A cell, or worse. Reverend Miles, flustered, pointed a shaky finger. But the voucher, it says, Tawa, we must follow the paper. A contract is a contract, sanctified by the company. The cowboys were loving this. Gonna make him take her. Reverend forced the issue. Tawa's patience, the thin, brittle peace he had cultivated for 15 years, finally snapped. He turned his head, and his gaze swept the crowd. The cowboys, the Reverend, the silent men on the boardwalk. His voice was not loud, but it cut through every other sound. I do not buy people. The silence was absolute. It was as if he had fired a gun. The cowboys stopped laughing. The Reverend's mouth hung open. Silas Burke's smile faltered. Just for a second. Evelyn Hart stared at him, her fear momentarily eclipsed by a stark, sudden understanding. This man, this stranger, had just handed her back a piece of her own soul. The coach driver, Hake, broke the spell. He spat into the dust. Look, lady, I ain't got all day. The mail is due. You got fare back to Fort Worth. It is $50. Coin. Evelyn's hand went to the small reticule at her waist. Tawa could see the panic in her eyes now, the sheer, cliff-edge terror. I do not, she whispered. The company. All my funds were for the passage here. She had nothing. She had nowhere to go. Her reputation in Boston was destroyed. A woman who left on a marriage contract could not return. She had burned the bridge, and the far bank was on fire. Silas Burke's smile returned, wider this time. Well, that simplifies things. She is destitute, and she is Tabar's contracted property. I'll just hold her in my office, for her own protection, of course, until Jasper can ride in and collect his investment. He took a step toward her. Come along, Missy. Tawa moved. He did not rush. He simply placed himself between the sheriff and the woman. He was a wall. He did not look at Burke. He did not look at Evelyn. He looked at the frightened postmaster. The post office made the mistake, Tawa said, his voice a low rumble. The post office will fix it. How? Mr. Tawa? Abernathy squeaked, his eyes wide behind his spectacles. The wire is down. It could be 2 weeks. She will wait, Tawa said, for the telegraph, to confirm the name. Wait where? Burke challenged, his hand moving to rest on his pistol again. The hotel won't take her without money. You gonna put her up? Tawa in your dugout, that'll look right fine. That'll look just like you accepted the delivery after all. Tawa's mind, a mind trained to see trails where there were none, found the one path. He thought of the small, derelict shed behind the post office, a forgotten structure. The government paid him $2 a week from the depot fund to repair it in his spare time. A new roof, a solid door. I am repairing the post office shed, Tawa said. The words came out clear, logical. It is government property. She will wait there. On government property, under the protection of the United States Post Office, until the wire is fixed. It was a brilliant stroke. It took her out of Burke's reach and out of his own. It made her a federal problem. Burke's face darkened. He could not arrest a woman who was a ward of the post office without starting a war with the federal marshals. A woman, unchaperoned, the Reverend sputtered, appalled. In a shed, it is unseemly. She is safer in a shed than in a cell. Reverend, Tawa said, his black eyes finally locking with Burke's. Evelyn Hart, seeing the three choices laid out before her, a cell with Burke, a ride to God knows where with Tabor, or this strange, temporary asylum found her footing. She stepped past Burke, past the Reverend, and stood before Abernathy. "Mr. Abernathy," she said, her voice shaking but firm, "as I am the subject of a postal error, I formally request shelter from the post office until this matter is clarified. I accept the use of the shed." Tawa nodded once. He did not offer her a word. He walked to the back of the coach, found her single, battered trunk, and lifted it. He carried it, his left shoulder taking the strain, and walked to the shed behind the main building. He unlocked the door with a key from his pocket. The space was small, 10 feet by 10 feet. It was dark. It smelled of old harness, dry wood, and dust. But the roof was new, and the floor was swept. He set the trunk down. Evelyn followed him, stopping in the doorway. The light from the door cut a bright rectangle on the floor. The crowd was dispersing, muttering, the show over. For a moment, they were alone. She looked around the small, empty space. This was her new life. A shed. She was about to say something, a word of thanks, perhaps, when her eyes fell on an object hanging from a peg by the door. It was a set of buffalo horns, old and gray, but polished smooth by time or handling, a relic of a world she had only read about, a symbol of this vast, terrifying land. Without thinking, drawn by a need to touch something real, she reached out her hand, her fingers just grazing the cold, hard curve. Tawa's voice was not loud, but it was sharp as flint. "Do not touch!" She flinched as if struck, snatching her hand back. Her heart hammered. He stood in the shadows, his face impossible to read. "That is a memorial," he said, his voice low, tight, vibrating with an intensity she could not understand. "For the dead." He turned and walked out, leaving her in the gloom. He did not look back. He shut the door, the sound of the latch clicking into place echoing in the small, dark room. The cultural divide was not a gap. It was a chasm, and he had just placed her on the other side of it. He went to the livery, got his horse, and rode out onto the plains. He had a job to do. Tawa rode for 2 days. He scouted the trail for the next stage, his mind a quiet, cold place. He camped under the stars, the grulla his only companion. The wind and the emptiness were his church, and he went there to be cleansed of the noise of Red Ford. But the noise followed him, the image of the woman, Evelyn Hart, standing in the dust with her straight back and her terrified eyes, would not leave him. He returned to Red Ford to find the town buzzing. He went to the mercantile first. Abernathy looked as if he had not slept. "Mr. Tawa, thank goodness, it is a disaster, a complete disaster." "The wire," Tawa said, not asking. "A sandstorm, sir, 100 miles north of here." Abernathy wrung his hands, his knuckles white. "Tore down the poles for a 20-mile stretch. The repair crew says, they say it will be 2 weeks, perhaps 3. And the mail pouch, the one from Fort Worth with the Atlantic Matrimonials correspondence, lost. The stage driver says it was swept away fording the Red River. Gone. We have no confirmation. We have no way to get one." 2 weeks. Tawa felt the invisible net tighten. 2 weeks in that shed, with Silas Burke watching her and the town whispering. He was turning to leave when the sound of hoofbeats and loud voices filled the street. It was not the casual gait of cowboys. This was a man arriving. Tawa stepped back into the shadows of the mercantile, by the sacks of grain. A large man on a fine black horse pulled up, scattering chickens. He was followed by 2 riders who looked as if they were carved from hard, mean wood. The man was Jasper Tabor. He was thick in the chest, his face red from the sun and whiskey. A fancy waistcoat stretched tight over his gut. He swung down, his spurs jangling, and did not bother to tie his horse. Silas Burke emerged from his office, his smile back in place. "Jasper, You made good time." "I made the time I was paid for." Tabor boomed, slapping the dust from his vest. "Where is she? Where is my woman?" "A slight delay," Burke said, his voice smooth. "Our postmaster is holding her, a technicality." Just then, Evelyn Hart emerged from the post office shed. She carried a small wooden bucket, her head down, walking toward the town pump. She had not seen them. Tabor saw her, his eyes lit with a possessive, hungry light. Well, there she is, my little Boston bird." He strode forward, cutting off her path to the pump. Evelyn stopped, her hand flying to her throat. She looked at this large, florid man and the silver badge beside him. She knew instantly who he was. "Miss Hart," Tabor said, removing his hat with a flourish. "Jasper Tabor, at your service. There has been a most unfortunate mix-up with the paperwork, but I am here to correct it. We will have you home to the ranch before sundown." Reverend Miles hurried out of the eatery, wiping crumbs from his mouth, clearly summoned. "Miss Hart," he began, "Mr. Tabor has explained the situation. He has the contract. He has paid his bond. A promise is a promise, my dear." Evelyn looked at the three men, the buyer, the law, the church, an unholy trinity, come to claim her. "Sir," she said, her voice shaking but low, "I signed that contract based on correspondence. This is not what I agreed to." Tabor's smile became a sneer. "You agreed to be my wife, Missy. The fine print is not your concern. The money was paid. You are mine." He reached out to take her arm, to take the bucket. "She is not going." The voice came from the shadows of the mercantile. Tawa stepped out into the hard, bright sun. He was covered in the dust of the trail. He looked at no one but Tabor. Tabor's hand stopped, hovering in the air. "Who in the hell are you?" "This is the man on the paper," Burke said, his voice sharp with amusement. "This is Tawa, the Indian scout who thinks he has a say. A Comanche." Tabor's face turned a darker red. "This is what this is about. You are holding my property for a goddamned Indian." "She is not property," Tawa said. He took a step forward, his hand nowhere near the knife on his belt. But his presence was a physical force. "And she is not yours." "It is a legal contract," Tabor roared, pulling the paper from his pocket. "Silas, arrest this savage for interfering." Burke held up a hand. "Now, Jasper, let us do this proper. Tawa, you have no claim here. This is white folks' business, a legal, binding document." Tawa ignored him. He looked at Abernathy, who was cowering in the doorway of the post office. "Mr. Abernathy, you are the federal man. The wire is down. The post office is protecting this woman. Tell them the law. Tell them the territorial statute. Can a woman be forced into a marriage? Can the Reverend perform a ceremony if she does not say yes?" Abernathy swallowed, but Tawa had given him a rock to stand on. He was a small man, but the United States Mail was a large institution. He clutched his spectacles. He is right, Mr. Tabor, Sheriff. The Territorial Statute, Volume 4, page 20, is quite clear. The consent of both parties must be contemporaneous, given at the time of the ceremony. Without her verbal consent, Reverend Miles cannot perform the rite, and as the post office is responsible for the error, I cannot release her to you. Not until the wire is fixed. Tabor looked as if he might explode, but Burke, he was smarter. He saw the trap Tawa had laid, and he saw a new one to spring. He stepped back, his thumbs hooked in his belt, and he spoke not to Tawa, but to the gathering crowd, the cowboys, the blacksmith, the women who were now watching from behind their curtains. "Well now," Burke said, his voice loud, carrying, "this is a fine situation. Here is a good, prosperous white rancher, come to claim his legal bride, and here is a Comanche scout, holding her in a shed, refusing to let her go. telling us what the law is. He let that sink in. Sounds to me like he is keeping her for himself. Sounds a lot like abduction. What do you folks think, a lone white woman, kept by an Indian, right here in town? The word abduction hung in the air, venomous. The crowd murmured. This was a spark in a dry prairie. Tawa's face was stone, but he knew the danger. He had seen posses form on Les. He was trapped. To protect her, he had made himself a target. Evelyn saw it, too. She saw the faces of the townsfolk turning, the suspicion, the dark, hungry curiosity. She saw Tawa, standing alone, taking the heat of their hatred for her. Her terror, her fatigue, her despair coalesced into a single sharp point of anger. She dropped the bucket. It hit the dust with a thud. "Am I chattel?" she cried out. Her voice was not a crisp Boston sound now. It was a raw, human cry. "Am I a parcel, Sheriff Burke, to be kept or collected?" She turned to the crowd, her eyes blazing. "I am not. My name is Evelyn Hart. I was a teacher in Boston. I am not a bride to be traded like livestock. Mr. Tabor's contract was for a wife. I am a person, and I do not consent to this marriage." She turned to Tabor. "I will not be your wife, sir. Not today. Not ever." Then she faced the people of Red Ford. "You think I am a vagrant, a burden. I have read that your children have no school. My trunks are not full of gowns. They are full of books. I am not a kept woman. I am a teacher. Starting now, I will offer lessons, reading, writing, arithmetic, for 10 cents a day. I will pay for my own provisions. I will remain under the protection of the post office until this error is rectified, and I will earn my own keep." The crowd was silent, stunned. Jasper Tabor was speechless, his mouth working. He had paid for a quiet, submissive wife, and he had gotten this. "A schoolmarm," he finally sputtered. "I did not pay $1,000 for a damn schoolmarm." "Then you have a complaint with Atlantic Matrimonials." "Mr. Tabor," Evelyn said, her voice shaking but cold. "But you have no complaint with me." Burke and Tabor were beaten. For now. To move against a schoolteacher, a symbol of civilization, was a different matter than seizing a fallen woman. Burke gave Tabor a look, a quiet signal. Not now. "This is not over," Tabor snarled, jabbing a finger at Tawa, then at Evelyn. "You'll both regret this." He and his men stomped into the saloon, Burke following, his face thoughtful. Tawa looked at Evelyn. She was trembling, the fight draining out of her, leaving her pale. He saw the cost of her stand. She had made herself a pillar of the community, but she was still a woman alone, in a shed. He gave her one sharp nod, respect. Then he turned and walked to the livery. That evening, as the sun set and the air grew cold, he knew the shed was not safe. The lock was a joke. Burke and Tabor were in the saloon, drinking, their voices rising. He found her outside the shed, gathering chips of wood for a fire. "You cannot stay here," he said, his voice low. Her face fell. The bravado of the afternoon was gone. "Mr. Tawa, I have no other place." "My place," he said, the words heavy. "Not the dugout, the horse shed. It is stone. The door is thick." She flinched, and he saw the sheriff's words in her eyes. "Mr. Tawa, what the sheriff said, people will talk." He cut her off. "Let them. The shed has a heavy bar. On the inside, you will be safe from them." He paused. "And from me, this is the boundary." He drew a line in the dust between them with the heel of his boot. "I will not cross it. No one will." She looked at the line in the dust, then at his hard, unreadable face. She saw no lie there. Thank you." He moved her trunk. The room was small, meant for feed, but it was clean. It smelled of hay and old leather, a good, dry smell. There was a small, pot-bellied stove. He left her with a box of matches and a small stack of wood. She barred the door, the heavy oak bar falling into place with a solid, reassuring thud. She was alone, but she was safe. For hours. She sat, listening, but the only sounds were the wind and the soft movements of the horses in the stall next door. Then she heard a new sound, a low, pained sigh, and a sharp stamp of a hoof. It was not a sound of rest. She lifted the bar and slipped into the stable part of the shed, a small lantern in her hand. It was the Grula, his scouting horse. It was standing with its head down, favoring its left foreleg. In the lantern light, she saw it, a deep, jagged cut on the cannon bone, hidden by the dust of the trail. It was swollen, hot to the touch, and weeping. She was a city woman, but she was practical. She went to her trunk, the one full of books. Under the books, she had a small wooden box, her mother's box. Inside were small bottles, carbolic, a roll of clean linen bandages. She spoke to the horse, her voice low and soothing. "It is all right. It is all right. I am not going to hurt you." The horse, a half-wild creature, watched her with a large, dark eye. It trembled, but it stood. She cleaned the wound, her touch surprisingly sure, biting her lip as she flushed the dirt and grime from the cut. She applied the carbolic and wrapped the leg in a clean, tight bandage. She finished, patting the horse's neck. "There, that is better." She turned, and her heart leaped. Tawa was standing in the doorway, a shadow against the night. He had moved without a sound. He had been watching her. He said nothing. He walked to the horse. He knelt, his fingers lightly tracing the edge of her bandage. He felt the leg, his touch impossibly gentle. He looked at the horse's eye, then at the clean wound. He stood up. He looked at her, his face a mask in the dim light. She could not tell if he was angry. "It was infected," she whispered, her voice tight. I hope I did not overstep." He looked at her small, capable hands, stained with his horse's blood and the carbolic. He looked at her face, smudged with dirt. His gaze was not hard. It was questioning, as if he was seeing something he had not seen in 15 years. He nodded, once, a short, sharp gesture. Then he turned and was gone, melting back into the night. The next morning, she woke with the first light, stiff from the cold floor. She unbarred the door. On the stone step, on a clean piece of sacking, sat a round of cornbread, still giving off steam. Beside it was a small tin. It was full of honey. She sat in the doorway, the sun on her face, and ate. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. That night, she barred the door, the small stove glowing. She felt a different kind of safety. She was not just hiding. She was settled. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats. Slow. Not Tawa's light step. 3, maybe 4 riders. They were not using the road. They were in the scrub, circling. She blew out her lantern and went to a crack in the stone wall. She saw them, silhouettes against the skyline. They stopped, looking at the dugout, and at the stone shed. One of them pointed. They were not lost travelers. They were not soldiers. They were watching. She put her hand on the heavy wooden bar, her heart a cold drum in her chest. They were Tabar's men, and they knew exactly where she was. The tracks were plain in the damp earth by the creek bed. 3 riders. They had not been trying to be quiet. Tawa studied the hoof prints, his face grim. They had circled his dugout, and they had spent a long time watching the stone shed. He scattered the tracks with his boot, but the threat remained, a physical presence in the air. She could not just hide in the shed, a prisoner of his protection. That was not life. That was just a slower way to die. He found her by the corral, checking the bandage on the Grula's leg. The wound was clean, the swelling down. She had good hands. "You have a good touch for the horse," he said. She started, nearly dropping her roll of linen. "Mr. Tawa, I did not hear you." "You must learn to hear," he said, his voice flat. "The men who came last night, they will not always ride so loud. Today, I teach you." "Teach me." He walked to a mare, a placid-looking sorrel, and began to saddle her. He did not grab a side saddle. He put on a light stock saddle. "You will learn to ride, not like a Boston lady, sitting on a shelf. You will learn to ride to move." For a week, he was a harsh teacher. He put her on the horse and led her out onto the plains. "Your back is stiff. You must move with the horse. Be part of her. Stop fighting." He taught her to tie a knot that would hold a horse, a knot that would secure a pack, a knot she could tie in the dark. "This knot is life. This one is death. Do not mix them." He took her to a dry wash, far from town. He took out his own percussion cap revolver, the one he kept tucked in his waistband. "You have shot a gun." "A fowling piece," she whispered, her eyes wide at the weapon. "Once." "This is not for birds," he said. He showed her how to load. The cap, the powder, the ball. He made her feel the weight of it in her hand. "This is not a toy. It is a promise. You only pull it if you mean to keep the promise." He set up a tin can on a rock. "Aim, squeeze, do not pull." The first shot was loud, the smoke acrid, and it missed by a yard. Again. She shot until her arm ached, until her ears rang. Finally, she hit the can. It spun into the air with a satisfying ping. She looked at him, a small, proud smile on her face. He did not smile back. "Good. Now you know how to make noise." He took the gun and put it away. "The best fight is the one you do not have. You must learn to be quiet. You must learn to listen." He took her to a ridge overlooking the plains. "Sit," he commanded. "What do you hear?" "The wind, Mr. Tawa." "What is the wind saying?" She looked at him, confused. It is just wind." "No," he said, his own eyes on the horizon. "It is a messenger. It tells you where the water is. It tells you if riders are coming. It tells you when the storm is close. Stop talking. Stop thinking. Listen, your Boston books are loud. The land is quiet. You must be quiet too, to understand it." She sat with him for an hour. She fought the urge to fill the silence, to ask questions. She fought the urge to impress him with what she knew. Instead, she just listened. She listened to the scrape of a lizard on a rock, the call of a hawk so high he was just a dot, the sigh of the grass as the wind passed over it. She did not know what it meant, but she was learning to hear it. Her quietness, her refusal to pry, did not go unnoticed. She never asked about the buffalo horns. She never asked about his past, or the scar she sometimes saw the outline of through his shirt. She accepted his lessons and his cornbread with a simple, "Thank you, Mr. Tawa." One afternoon, 2 women came. They were not from Redford. They were Comanche, from the Allied camp to the south. They were older, their faces carved with lines of sun and wisdom, their dresses decorated with fine beadwork. They walked up to the stone shed and simply stood, watching Evelyn as she mended a tear in her skirt. Evelyn's heart hammered. She stood, her hands still. She did not know the custom. One of the women held out a small, flat piece of bread, still warm. Evelyn looked at it, then at the woman's face. She saw no threat. She took the bread and, bowing her head slightly, took a small bite. The women smiled. They spoke to each other, their words soft, like water over stones. Then, with gestures, they pointed to their camp, and then to a small loom one of them carried. They pointed at Evelyn. Tawa appeared from the stable. "They are asking you to come," he translated, his voice rough. He seemed surprised. "They want you to sit with them, to weave." Evelyn went. She spent the afternoon in their camp, sitting in the shade of a cottonwood, her clumsy, educated fingers fumbling with the bright threads. The women were patient. They laughed. Not at her, but with her. As the sun began to dip, the oldest of the women, a grandmother with eyes like dark, polished stones, came to her. She looked at the worn lace handkerchief Evelyn had tucked into her sleeve, a last link to Boston. The old woman gently pulled it out. Then she pressed something else into Evelyn's palm. It was a small, smooth piece of cedar wood, smelling of pine and earth, tied to a leather thong. Evelyn looked at it, then at the woman, her eyes full of questions. That evening, she asked Tawa what it meant. She said. Tawa translated, looking not at her but at the cedar charm. To put away the ghost cloth. She said, "Wear this. It will help you remember who you are." That night, Evelyn packed the lace handkerchief at the bottom of her trunk. She tied the cedar thong around her neck. The wood felt warm against her skin. While she was finding a place, Jasper Tabor was asserting he could not win by force, so he used money and fear. A new notice appeared on the post office door. Abernathy had posted it, his hands shaking so much the tacks went in crooked. Silas Burke had signed it, his signature a bold black slash. By order of the Redford Township, it read, providing aid, comfort, or commerce to the unvouched-for woman. Evelyn Hart is prohibited. Any person found in violation will be fined $20. The town was cut in two. The saloon crowd, men who worked for Tabor or feared him, nodded in agreement. But the blacksmith's wife, Mrs. Gable, who had 2 young daughters, marched up to the sign, read it, and spat in the dust at its base. $20, is it? She said, loud enough for Abernathy to hear. I'd pay it. Reverend Miles, caught in the middle, preached a vague and trembling sermon about honoring contracts, both civil and divine. Tawa saw the sign. His face was granite. He walked past it, into the mercantile. The store went quiet. He walked to the back. He lifted a 50-pound sack of flour onto his good shoulder. He gathered a side of bacon, a large tin of coffee, and a bag of sugar. He walked to the counter and dropped it all. He paid in heavy silver coin, his gaze daring the other shoppers to speak. Then, in the full light of day, he carried the supplies, load by load, from the mercantile across the dusty street to the stone horse shed. He did not look at Silas Burke, who was watching from his chair, tipped back against the wall of the jail. He did not need to. It was a declaration of war, fought with flour and bacon. The next day, the sky changed. The hard, endless blue was gone, replaced by a high, thin haze of yellow-gray. The wind, which had been a steady presence, died. The air became thick, heavy, and hot. Tawa stopped his work, his head up, tasting the air. He walked to the shed where Evelyn was teaching the Gable girls their letters in the dirt. "A storm is coming," he said, his voice low. The girls scurried away. "It seems quiet," Evelyn said, wiping the dust from her hands. "It is the quiet before the cannon," he said. "A bad one. Bring the horses into the main stall, bar the doors, and put water inside. We will not be able to come out." It hit just after sundown. It came with a sound Tawa had only heard twice before, a high, thin scream that grew into a solid roar, like 1,000 trains, shaking the very stones of the shed. The wind did not blow. It struck. The world went black, filled with noise and flying dirt. Evelyn huddled by the stove, the cedar charm clutched in her hand. The building trembled. Then came a sound, a terrible crack, like a giant bone breaking, followed by a tearing, splintering crash. The far end of the shed roof, the older section over the feed, was ripped away as if by a giant hand. The wind and the rain exploded into the room, a freezing, violent torrent. Tawa was there in an instant, shouting over the din. He was already soaked. "The rafters! We will lose the rest of the roof." He was dragging a huge, heavy canvas tarp. the one he used to cover his wagon. "We must cover the hole now." It was a battle, not with a man, but with the sky itself. Tawa scrambled up the wall, onto the main beam, a rope in his hand. "Haul!" he yelled. "When I say." Evelyn grabbed the heavy, wet canvas. Her feet slipped in the mud that was already forming on the floor. The wind tore at her, ripping her hair from its pins, plastering her clothes to her body. She was blind, soaked, and terrified, but she held on. "Now!" he roared. She pulled, her city-soft hands screaming, using her whole weight to help him drag the tarp over the gaping hole. The wind caught it, snapping it like a whip, nearly pulling her from her feet. Tawa fought it, his body braced against the main rafter, a silhouette against the gray, churning sky. They fought for an hour. It felt like a lifetime. Finally, with a last desperate heave. Tawa anchored the final corner. The terrible, tearing wind was muffled. The roar was outside again. The worst of the rain was deflected, pouring off the canvas instead of into the shed. They were both shaking, gasping for breath. The shed was a ruin of mud and scattered hay. They retreated to the one dry corner, by the small, pot-bellied stove. Tawa, his face bleeding from a scrape, threw in more wood. The fire caught, a small, defiant orange eye in the wet dark. They huddled beside it, too exhausted to speak. The storm was still howling, a beast raging against the walls. They were just two people, shivering, soaked to the bone. Evelyn held her hands out to the fire. They were trembling, not just from cold, but from exertion. Her palms were raw, bleeding where the rope had burned them. Tawa saw her hands. He saw the blood. He said nothing. He reached out, his own hard, calloused hands, and simply took hers. He engulfed them. His skin was rough, but his grip was steady. He rubbed her hands between his, hard, bringing the warmth back, bringing the blood to the surface, stopping the shaking. She looked up at him. Her face was smudged with dirt, her hair a wild tangle. She was not a Boston teacher. He was not a Comanche scout. They were just a man and a woman, alive. He looked at her. He saw the pulse beat in her throat. He saw the fear in her eyes, but also the strength. He smelled the soap that still clung to her, mixed with the sharp scent of rain and the sweet, coppery smell of her blood. He felt it, a low, slow ache in his chest, a feeling he had locked away for 15 years, a feeling he had promised himself he would never feel again. He had not touched a woman, not in kindness, not in comfort, since the day his wife's hand had grown cold in his. His gaze dropped to her mouth, parted slightly. She was breathing as fast as he was. The air between them was so thick it was hard to breathe. The sound of the storm was a dull roar, far away. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the thud of his own heart. Slowly, as if it cost him a great effort, he released her hands. He turned his head and stared into the fire. The moment, charged and dangerous, broke. He had held the line against the storm. He would hold the line against this, too. The morning was blinding. The storm was gone. The world was washed clean, scoured. The air between them was brittle, bright, and full of unspoken words. Tawa was already outside, his face a mask, clearing a fallen tree branch from the doorway. Evelyn came out, her hair brushed and pinned, her dress as tidy as she could make it. Her hands were wrapped in strips of clean linen. "Mr. Tawa," she said, her voice quiet. He did not turn. He hacked at the branch with his axe. "The storm is over." She stood in the doorway, the bright sun on her face. "Yes," she said. "The storm is over. Nothing was promised. Mr. Tawa, nothing was offered." The sound of the axe stopped. He turned, slowly, and looked at her. He saw the wrapped hands. He saw the set of her chin. He saw the cedar charm at her throat. He gave her one. Sharp nod. The boundary was back in place. Good. A shout from the town. A single rider. on a horse lathered in foam. He was not a cowboy. He was a telegraph man. He galloped straight to the post office, leaping from the saddle. "Abernathy," he yelled, waving a piece of paper. "It is up. The line is up. They patched it through at Fort Sill. I got the message. The confirmation from Atlantic Matrimonials. It is coming through. It will be here by evening." The news shot through Redford like a bullet. The whole town, divided by the notice, by the flower, by the storm, seemed to hold its breath. Tonight the paper would speak. In the small telegraph shack by the new railroad tracks, Silas Burke laid a heavy gold coin on the operator's desk. "It has been a long, hard couple of weeks. Son," he said, his voice friendly, "a man deserves a drink." He pushed a bottle of whiskey across the desk. "Let us just make sure, when that message comes in, that the name is spelled correctly." The air in Redford was a held breath. Every person in town knew what that clicking telegraph key meant. It was a verdict, coming down a thin iron wire. For Jasper Tabor and Silas Burke, it was victory. For Tawa and Evelyn, it was a death sentence. They sat in the stone shed, the silence heavy between them. The sun was setting, painting the washed sky in brutal colors of orange and purple. "He will be here by dark," Evelyn said, her voice a dry whisper. "Tabor." "He will come," Tawa agreed. "With the paper and the law and the church. And this time, you will not be able to say no." "Mr. Tawa," she said, her back straight, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "There is something you must know. I am not what I seem." Tawa looked at her, his face unreadable in the dimming light. "No one is." "I am not a teacher," she said, the words rushing out. "Not just a teacher. I am a writer, or I was trying to be, at a Boston newspaper. An assistant, they called it. I fetched coffee and I copied articles, but I listened." She stood, pacing the small, 10 by 10 space that had become her world. "I heard the stories, the men who wrote to the agencies, and I saw the letters from the women. The company, Atlantic Matrimonials. It was a whisper. Women who were promised good lives, who arrived to find nothing. Debt, hardship, worse. Men like Tabor, who did not want a wife, but a servant, a piece of property." Tawa watched her, his own past, his own people, bought and sold and moved by paper, rising in his throat. "I started to investigate," she continued, her voice gaining a sharp, angry edge. "I collected their letters. I found the contracts. I saw the fine print that made them indentured. When I took it to my editor, he laughed at me. He said I was hysterical. Then, a week later, he told me my position was no longer necessary. He had been bought. The agency, the newspaper, they were all connected." She stopped, facing him, her eyes bright with a fire he had not seen before. Not even in the storm. "I was a fool. I was a romantic. I thought I could go back to teaching. But the story was in me. I had to know. I had to have proof. So I did the only thing I could." "You came," Tawa said, the pieces clicking into place. "I signed a contract," she said, her voice bitter. "With my own name. I used my last dollar to buy passage under their terms. I would be a bride. I would be one of them. I would live the story. And I would write it. I would expose them all." She gave a short, hard laugh. "I was so certain I could control it. I thought a man like Jasper Tabor, a prosperous rancher, would be a simpleton. Easy to manage, easy to document. I never counted on a mistake." Tawa finished. "On J. Tawa." "I never counted on a good man," she whispered. He stood then, the silence stretching. He walked to the door and looked out at the darkening plains. He understood her, more than she knew. He, too, had a fire in him, a need to see justice. He had just buried his own, deep in the earth, where it could not be hurt. "You are a fool," he said, his voice rough. She flinched, but he did not turn. You brought a book of matches into a powder keg. This is not Boston. You do not expose men like Tabor and Burke. You do not fight them with words on paper. Then how? She cried. He turned, his face a hard mask in the twilight. Truth here is not written, he said. It is paid for, in blood. He was about to say more when they heard a commotion from the street. Not the quiet of the coming evening, but the rattle of a coach, and a loud, angry voice. Jasper Tabor's voice. Tawa put a hand on Evelyn's arm, silencing her, and they listened. What in the hell do you mean? It is not on the manifest, Tabor was roaring. It is a black ledger. My name is on it. It was in my trunk. Find it. Damn you. They heard the stage driver's weary reply. I told you, Mr. Tabor, the storm almost took us into the river. We had to lighten the load. Things got shifted. Maybe it fell out. Maybe it is in Fort Worth. It is not here. A string of curses from Tabor. Then the sound of the saloon door slamming. A black ledger. Tawa and Evelyn looked at each other. The word ledger hung in the air. The next morning, the town was quiet. The telegraph message had not yet been made public. Burke and Tabor were biding their time, waiting for the most public, most humiliating moment to present the paper and claim the prize. Tawa was checking his horse's new shoe when a shadow fell over him. It was a young boy, no more than 14. His name was Little Hawk, a Ute boy who had no people and who survived by running messages and small parcels between the fort and the town. He was quick, silent, and one of the few people Tawa ever spoke to. Tawa, the boy whispered, his eyes wide. He looked around, his movements bird-like. What is it, Little Hawk? The boy reached into his shirt. I found this, by the road, where the coach stopped. I heard the white man, Tabor, yelling. He pulled out a small, black-bound book. It was warped from damp, the edges caked with mud. It was a ledger. Tawa took it. He gave the boy a small piece of jerky, a silent thank you. Go, Tawa said. Do not speak of this. The boy vanished. Tawa took the book to the stone shed. He did not go inside. He and Evelyn stood in the bright, harsh sunlight, hidden between the shed and the corral, and he opened it. It was not a story. It was arithmetic, but it was the most terrible story Evelyn had ever read. Names, dates, one girl, Irish, from Boston, one, German, from St. Louis. Beside each entry, a dollar amount, a bond fee, and then another column. Brokerage, S. Burke. Commission, S. Burke. Services rendered, S. Burke. It was not just Tabor, it was a business. Silas Burke was not just Tabor's man. He was a partner. He was taking a fee on every woman who passed through Red Ford, redirecting them, selling them, ensuring their contracts were ironclad. My God, Evelyn whispered, her hand on the cedar charm at her throat. It is worse. He is a slaver. The women in town, the ones who had whispered, began to take on a new light. Mrs. Gable, the blacksmith's wife, had been kind to her. She had left a small pot of broth on the shed step after the storm. Now, her support seemed less like charity and more like an alliance. Even Reverend Miles, when Tawa had passed him in the street, had looked away, his face a map of conflict. Unable to meet Tawa's eyes, the town was rotting from the inside, and Silas Burke was the infection. This, Evelyn said, her voice shaking with a cold rage. This is the proof. This changes everything. It changes nothing, Tawa said, his voice hard. Not yet. A book can be burned. A witness can be silenced. And we are still in his town, as if the devil heard his name. Silas Burke stepped out of the jail. He was not looking at them, but his gaze swept the town. He was looking for something. He was looking for his ledger. His eyes fell on Little Hawk, who was sweeping the boardwalk in front of the saloon for a nickel. Burke watched the boy for a long, cold minute. Then he sauntered over. Tawa and Evelyn were too far to hear, but they saw the exchange. They saw Burke grab the boy by the arm. They saw Little Hawk try to pull away. They saw Burke slap the boy, hard, across the face. Burke dragged the struggling boy to the jail, threw him inside, and locked the door. Evelyn gasped. "He can't!" "He just did," Tawa said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "He is sending a message. He is cleaning up loose ends. He thinks the boy found his book. He will question him." The thought of what questioning meant, in a cell, with a man like Burke, made Evelyn's stomach clench. What will happen to him? "He will not survive the night," Tawa said. It was a statement of fact. A new fire lit in Tawa's eyes. This was not about a contract anymore. This was not about a white woman's problems. This was one of his own. A boy, an innocent. The old warrior, the one who had been asleep for 15 years, began to wake up. "I am going to get him," Tawa said. "What? How, Tawa? That is a jail." "It is a wooden box with a weak lock." Tawa said, "Tonight, after moonset, Burke and Tabor will be in the saloon, drinking, celebrating their coming victory. They will be loud, I will be quiet." "You will need help," Evelyn said, her mind working fast, the fear replaced by a sharp, cold clarity. "You will be quiet, but they will not be quiet enough. You need a diversion, a real one." He looked at her. "This is not your fight." "He arrested that boy because of me," she said, her voice fierce. "He arrested him because of this book. That makes it my fight. You taught me how to make noise. Mr. Tawa, let me make noise." The hours crawled by. The sky was black, the moon a sliver, just as it had been the night she arrived. It felt like a lifetime ago. From the shed, they watched the saloon. It was bright, loud. Music and shouting spilled into the street. Tawa nodded. It was time. He was a shadow, moving from the shed, across the creek, to the darkness behind the jail. Evelyn took a deep breath. She unpinned her hair. Letting it fall, she pinched her cheeks, hard. Then she walked out of the darkness of the dugout and straight toward the light of the saloon. She pushed the swinging doors open. The music stopped. The laughter, the shouting, all of it died. 50 men, miners, cowboys, and Tabor's hired guns turned to stare. At the bar, Silas Burke and Jasper Tabor looked up, their faces a mask of shock. Well, Burke drawled, recovering. "The little bird has come out of her cage. Come to celebrate with us. Missy, the telegraph came. We were just about to come and get you." "I am here," Evelyn said, her voice high, trembling. "To speak to Mr. Tabor." She walked, her steps unsteady, toward the bar. I have reconsidered," she said, her voice breaking. "I am a woman, alone. I cannot fight you. I will honor the—" She reached the bar. She looked at Jasper Tabor, at his red, leering face. She looked at Silas Burke, at his cold, snake-like eyes. "I will," she said, and her eyes rolled back in her head. She collapsed. A perfect, well-executed Boston parlor faint, falling directly at Jasper Tabor's feet. The saloon exploded in chaos. "She has fainted. Get her water. Give her air." Tabor, furious and flustered, was trying to pick her up. Burke was yelling at the crowd to get back. Every single eye in the room was on the small, crumpled woman on the filthy floor. At the back of the jail, Tawa's knife slipped the latch. The lock was cheap, just as he thought. He was inside. Little Hawk. The boy was a whimpering bundle in the corner. His face was already bruised. "Tawa," he sobbed. "Be quiet," Tawa said. He cut the boy's bonds. "Go to my dugout. Do not stop. Do not look back." The boy was gone. a ghost in the night. Tawa did not follow. He took a single, dark feathered arrow from the quiver he had retrieved from his dugout. He looked at the wall where Burke's wanted posters were tacked. He stepped back. He drew the bowstring, not with anger, but with cold, precise intent. He loosed. The arrow sang in the confines of the cell, a single, vicious note, and drove itself 6 inches into the wall, pinning a stack of Burke's warrants to the wood. It quivered there, a deadly, final message. Then he, too, was gone. In the saloon, Evelyn was stirring. Oh, my, she murmured, her hand to her head. Where am I? You are in my saloon, ma'am, Burke said, his voice gravel. And you have made your last scene. Just then, one of Tabar's men ran in from the street. Sheriff, someone's been at the jail. The lock is broken. Burke's face went white. He shoved men out of the way and ran out, Tabor at his heels. They found the empty cell. They found the arrow. It was a declaration. Tawa was waiting in the shed when Evelyn returned, her face pale, but her eyes triumphant. Little Hawk was safe in the dugout. He knows, Tawa said, pulling his saddle and gear. We have run out of time. He has the law. He has the guns. And we have the truth, Evelyn said, holding up the small, black book. Tawa looked at the book. Then he looked at her. He had warned her that truth here cost blood. Now, he saw the price had been paid, by the boy, and the debt was owed. Red Ford is a lost cause, he said. The law here is a snake, eating its own tail. We cannot fight him here. Then where? She said, her voice tight. Tawa slung his saddle onto the grulla. The circuit judge, he is at Fort Laramie, 100 miles. He is a federal man. He is not on Burke's payroll. He looked at her. It was not a question. It was a choice. We ride, now. There was no moon. There was no time. Tawa put Evelyn on the sorrel mare, the one he had taught her to ride. He put Little Hawk on his own grulla, the horse with the healed leg. He took the last horse, a rangy buckskin, for himself. The black ledger was wrapped in oilcloth and thrust deep into his own saddlebag, under the ammunition. You will ride, he told Evelyn, his voice a low command. You will not stop. You will not look back. You will follow the creek bed for 5 miles, then strike north. Due north. Do not fail. She nodded, her face pale but set in the darkness. And you? I will be the shadow behind you, he said. He gave the rump of her horse a hard slap. The horses plunged into the night, their hooves muffled by the soft earth of the creek. They rode for 3 hours, pushing the animals hard. The land was flat, open, and offered no cover. Every sound was a threat, every shadow a pursuer. Little Hawk rode like he was born to it, a small, grim shadow on the big grulla. Evelyn was a surprise. She held the saddle, her back straight, her body moving with the mare as he had taught her. She had been a good student. She was a long way from Boston. When the first gray light of dawn touched the sky, Tawa pulled them into a shallow arroyo, a cut in the earth that offered the barest concealment. They will be coming, he said, scanning their back trail. His eyes were hard, narrowed to slits. They found the jail. They found the arrow. They know. They are reading our tracks right now. Can we outrun them? Evelyn whispered, her voice hoarse. Her hands were raw, clutching the reins. No, Tawa said. Their horses are fresh. Ours are tired. We will not outrun them. We must outthink them. We must go where they cannot, or will not. He pointed north, toward a shimmering, hazy line on the horizon. The Cimarron breaks, 100 miles of nothing, salt and rock and no water. Little Hawk, who had said nothing, looked at Tawa. The white men will die there, the boy said. A simple fact. We will not. Tawa said, I know a place. A spring. It is a one-day ride. If the ride is hard, but we must be harder. They rode. The sun came up, not as a friend, but as an enemy. It was a white-hot hammer, pounding the plains into an anvil. The washed clean air of the storm was gone, replaced by a suffocating, dusty heat. The world became a shimmering, white-hot blur. There was no talk. The only sound was the plodding of the hooves in the alkali dust, a soft, grim rhythm. By noon, the canteens were half empty. Tawa made them stop. Just for a moment. He gave a sip of water to Little Hawk, a sip to Evelyn. He took none for himself. "Your horse, the mare," he said to Evelyn. "She is limping." Evelyn's heart sank. The mare was favoring her right for the ride, she said. "Last night." "It is not far," Tawa said, but his face was tight. He was lying. It was very far. They pushed on. The heat was a physical thing, a heavy blanket. Evelyn's hat offered little protection. She felt the sun on her back, on her face, on her hands. Her skin was burning. Her head began to ache, a low, pounding drum that matched the hooves. By mid-afternoon, the world had dissolved. She was no longer riding. She was just holding on. The horizon was gone. The man in front of her, Tawa, was just a dark shape, wavering in the heat. She felt dizzy. Her stomach churned. She fell. She did not remember falling. One moment she was in the saddle, the next the burning, gritty sand was against her cheek. Tawa was beside her in an instant, his hands pulling her up. "Get up," he commanded. "We do not stop." I cannot," she whispered. Her lips were cracked, her tongue thick. "It is so hot, I must rest, just for a minute." "You rest now. You rest forever," Tawa said, his voice brutal. "The sun will cook you." He looked at her face, dead white under the grime and sunburn. He saw her eyes, unfocused. This was not weakness. This was the sunstroke. "Little Hawk," Tawa said. "The canteen." He unstopped his own canteen, the one he had not touched. He poured a precious cup of water. "Drink," he ordered Evelyn. She drank, the water hot, metallic, but the best thing she had ever tasted. He splashed the last of it on her face, on her wrists. Her breath came in a shuddering gasp. I am sorry," she whispered. The shame of her weakness, a new kind of heat. "Do not be sorry. Be strong," he said. He put his hands on her waist and lifted her, bodily, back into the saddle. He took the reins of her mare, tying them to his own saddle horn. He would lead her. He looked back, and his face went hard. Miles behind them, 5, perhaps 6 miles, was a small, dark cloud. It was not a rain cloud. It was a dust cloud. "Burke," he said, his voice flat. "He is on the trail." He looked at the dying mare. He looked at Evelyn, swaying in the saddle. He looked at the sun, still 2 hours from setting. He had one chance. "We cannot go north," he said, making the decision. "The mare will not make it. We go west, to the canyons, my people's land." "But they are chasing us," Evelyn said, her mind fuzzy. "They will follow." "Yes," Tawa said. "They will follow. But I know the ground. He does not." He turned the horses west, toward a line of dark, jagged rocks that looked like broken teeth against the sky. It was a place the white men avoided. A place of ghosts. They said, for Tawa, it was home. They rode into the mouth of the canyon as the sun was touching the horizon, painting the rocks a deep, bloody red. The air in the canyon was cooler, but it was a dead, still air. "We will rest here," Tawa said, pointing to a high alcove, hidden by scree. "Water the horses, just a little." They found a small seep, a dark, damp patch of rock. The water was bitter, but it was water. They drank, and the horses drank, their heads low. "He will follow us in," Tawa said, his gaze on the canyon entrance. "He is a fool if he does," Little Hawk said, his voice, for the first time, holding a trace of something other than fear. Contempt. "This is our place." "He is not a fool," Tawa said. "He is arrogant, and he has a new tool." As if in answer, a sound echoed down the canyon. It was not a gunshot. It was a rumble, a deep, earth-shaking boom. Evelyn screamed as the ground trembled. Rocks, small at first, then larger, began to rain down from the canyon rim. Tawa grabbed her, pulling her and Little Hawk tight against the rock wall of the alcove as a ton of rock and sand cascaded down, blocking the path they had just taken. The boom echoed, and echoed again. "Dynamite." "He is not following us," Tawa said, his voice a deadly, quiet hiss. "He was ahead of us. He knows this pass. Someone told him. He is using mining tools. He is sealing us in." The dust settled, leaving a wall of rubble, 20 feet high. They were trapped. "And," Tawa said, his voice even colder, "he has blocked the way out, too." Another boom, this one fainter, from the north end of the canyon. Silas Burke had them in a box. "We are trapped," Evelyn breathed, her hand on the cedar charm. The terror she had felt in Red Ford, in the storm, was nothing. This was a grave. Little Hawk was looking at the sorrel mare. The horse was down, her leg twisted at an unnatural angle, pinned by a small boulder. The mare screamed, a high, thin sound of agony that was worse than the dynamite. Tawa walked to the horse. He did not hesitate. He drew his knife. He made one, quick, clean cut across the throat. The screaming stopped. The silence that fell was absolute. They had one horse, the Grulla. The buckskin had broken its tether in the panic and bolted. They were on foot, in a box canyon, with 2 horses dead and a posse waiting for them at both ends. Evelyn sank to the ground, the last of her strength gone. What do we do?" Tawa stood over the dead mare, his face a mask of stone. He was cleaning his knife on his pant leg. "They will wait for morning," he said. "They think we are caught." Evelyn looked at him, at this hard, cold man who had just saved her, who had killed a horse without blinking. "Why?" she asked. The question pulled from a place deeper than fear. "Why are you doing this? You hate us. You said you would not be involved." Tawa finished cleaning the knife. He sheathed it. He sat, his back against the rock, and for the first time, he looked tired. Not trail tired. He looked old. "You are right," he said, his voice so low she had to lean in to hear it. "I hate this. I hate your world. I hate your paper, and your laws, and your promises." He touched the scar on his left shoulder, the one he never spoke of. "But I did not always." He looked up, not at her, but at the thin slice of sky visible above them. 15 years ago, he said, his voice a dry rasp. "There was a treaty, peace. The great white father in Washington was done fighting us. We were done fighting him. We came to the fort. We came to sign the paper." His eyes were far away. "My wife was with me. She was a laugh. She was life. She was not afraid of the white men. She thought the peace was real." He paused, and Evelyn held her breath. He had never spoken more than 10 words at a time. Now, the dam was breaking. "That night," he said, "the soldiers celebrated. They celebrated the peace. They drank. They fired their guns into the air, yelling." He turned his head and looked at Evelyn, his eyes black, bottomless pools of pain. "A soldier, drunk, celebrating, fired his carbine, not into the air, into the dark, into our lodge." His voice broke, just for a second, a sound of rock cracking. "She was mending my moccasin. She looked up. She smiled at me. And then she was gone. A stray bullet, a celebration of peace. That is what your world gave me. That is the price of your paper." He looked at his hands. as if seeing the blood on them. I took a vow that night. Over her body, I swore I would never be in debt to one of your kind again. I would never trust one. I would never feel for one. I would be a stone for 15 years. I have kept that vow." Evelyn was silent. Her own troubles, the ledger, the contract, all of it, seemed so small, so pale. Next to this was not a scar. This was an amputation. She found her voice. It was shaking, but it was clear. "Mindo," she said. Tawa's head snapped up. "What did you say?" "Mindo, the woman," she said. "The Comanche woman, the grandmother who gave me this." She held up the cedar charm. "When I sat with them, I listened. I learned a few words. Mindo, it means vow, to carry a vow." She moved, crawling on the rocks until she was sitting in front of him. "She told me this was to remember who I am. Now I'm telling you, Tawa, remember who you are. You are not a stone." She reached out, her hand trembling, and she did not touch his face. She touched his chest, right over his heart. "I am not asking you," she said, her voice fierce, "to break your vow to her. I am asking you to make a new one, a vow to the living, to protect the innocent." Her gaze flicked to Little Hawk, who was watching, his eyes wide. "To protect him, to protect me, and Tawa, to protect yourself." He stared at her, his breathing harsh. He saw her, this woman from Boston, this writer, this fool who had come west to find a story and had found this instead. She was not asking for a rescue. She was offering him a reason. He looked at the wall of rock that trapped them. He looked at the sky. He had been a scout. He had been a warrior. It was time to be both. He stood up. The stone was gone. The fire was back. "They are at the mouth of the canyon," he said, his voice crisp, alive. "They think we are here. They are right." He grabbed Little Hawk. "You are small. You are fast. The Grula. Take him. At the north end of the pass, where the second charge was, there is a game trail, a goat path. It goes up. It is steep, but it will lead you out, above them." "And you?" the boy asked. "Evelyn and I," Tawa said, "will be loud." He checked his revolver. 4 shots left. He had his rifle, and 10 rounds. "No," Evelyn said. "I am not leaving you. I am not a fighter, but I will not." "You will," Tawa said, his voice sharp, but not cruel. "You will go with him. You will take the book." He pulled the ledger from his saddlebag and thrust it into her hands. This is what matters. Get it to Laramie, the judge. Do you understand?" "But they will kill you," she whispered. "They will try," Tawa said. He looked at the canyon walls. "They think they have me in a box. They do not know. I was born in a box like this." He gave her a shove toward the horse. "Go, now!" He turned his attention to the rock slide. He was pulling stones, creating a small V, a firing position. He was not planning to die. He was planning to fight. But Evelyn did not go. She was standing, holding the Grula's reins, her face a mask of terrible decision. "You are right, Tawa. You are a warrior, but you are a terrible liar." "What?" "That trail," she said, pointing north. "I saw it when we came in. It is not a goat path. It is a dead end. It is a sheer cliff. You are sending us there to be safe. You are sending us away so you can fight them alone. So you can die. So you can keep your old vow and not have to make a new one." Tawa stared at her. He had underestimated her. He had underestimated her a great deal. "All right," he said, a slow, dangerous smile touching his lips for the first time. "All right, we are all fools. Then, you want to fight? We will fight." He changed his plan, his mind working fast. "Silas has 6 men, 1, maybe 2, at the North Pass, the rest with him, at the South. They are lazy. They are waiting for us. We will not wait. We will use his own trap against him." He pointed to the loose scree on the canyon wall, above their heads. "We will be the goat path." He sent Little Hawk back, on foot. "Go, be a shadow. See where they are. How many—" The boy was gone, melting into the rocks. Tawa turned to Evelyn. "We are going to give them a false trail, a new one." He took the dead mare's hooves, a grim, terrible task. He began to make tracks that led away from the alcove, toward a narrow, dark split in the rock. A box canyon within the box canyon. A perfect trap. "He will follow these." Tawa said, "He is arrogant. He thinks I am running. He will come in, loud, and he will find nothing." "And us," Evelyn said. "We will be above him," Tawa said, pointing up, "with the wind and the sand." Little Hawk returned. "4," he whispered. "At the south, 2 on guard, 2 asleep by a fire. Silas is there, the other 2, at the North Pass. I think—" "4," Tawa said. He nodded. "It is enough." He gave Evelyn his rifle. "You know how to make noise. When I say, you will make noise. From up there." He pointed to a ledge, 100 feet up. "Aim at the rock, not the men." He sent her and Little Hawk up the trail, a dangerous, hand-over-hand climb. He waited. He built a small fire in the alcove, a fire that would send up a thin wisp of smoke, a fire that said, "We are here, we are trapped." Then he, too, climbed, a shadow on the rock, moving to a position across from Evelyn, flanking the false trail he had laid. They waited. As the sun came up, they heard the voices. Burke. "I see 'em," a man yelled. "Tracks, they're in that split canyon. Sheriff trapped like rats." "Good." Burke's voice, full of triumph. "Let's go dig 'em out, and bring the woman. Tabor wants her intact." Tawa watched them, 4 men, walking, confident, into the trap, Burke in the lead. He waited until they were deep in the narrow pass. He raised his hand. Evelyn, her heart hammering so hard she thought it would break her ribs, saw the signal. She rested the heavy rifle on the rock. She remembered his words. "Squeeze! Do not pull!" She aimed at the canyon wall, just above Burke's head. She fired. The shot was an explosion in the narrow space. A chip of rock flew, stinging Burke's face. "Ambush!" one of his men yelled, firing wildly. And then Tawa opened up, not with the rifle, but with the rocks. He was on the ridge above them, a single man, pushing, heaving, starting a new rock slide, not with dynamite, with his hands and his rage. Rocks, large and small, rained down on them. It was chaos. The men, trapped, were firing at shadows, at the sky. Tawa used the noise. He fired his own rifle. Once. The lead gunman, the one who had yelled ambush, spun and fell. Tawa did not aim to kill. He aimed to wound, but the man fell hard. And then a bullet, a wild shot from Burke, ricocheted. It tore a hot, burning line across Tawa's ribs. He grunted, the pain a sharp, sudden fire. He stumbled, but he did not fall. "He is hit!" Burke yelled. "He is up there, get him!" But the other men were not listening. They were terrified. The rocks, the shots from nowhere. They ran, scrambling back the way they came, dragging their wounded man. Burke stood alone for a second, his face a mask of black fury, firing his pistol at the cliffs. "Tawa, you are a dead man. Tawa." He, too, turned and ran. The silence, when it fell, was just as loud. "Tawa!" Evelyn screamed, scrambling down the rock face. "Tawa!" She found him, leaning against the rock, his hand pressed to his side. Blood, dark and slick, was welling between his fingers. "It is a graze," he said, his voice tight. "You are bleeding." "I am alive," he said. He looked at her, his eyes bright with a fire she had never seen. "And they are running." He pushed himself off the wall. "Come, Little Hawk, the grulla. We go now, while they are scared." They half ran, half stumbled, Tawa leaning on Evelyn, to the north end of the canyon. The 2 men Burke had left were gone, fled, terrified by the sounds of the battle. They broke out of the canyon mouth, out of the rock and the shadows, and onto the high plain. And there, in front of them, was a sight that made Evelyn want to weep. It was not rock, it was not sand, it was green, a wide, endless river of green grass, and in the distance, a silver ribbon, shining in the sun. "The Platte," Tawa whispered, the pain making his voice rough. "Fort Laramie, 1 day's ride." They had made it, they were alive, and they still had the book. The ride to Fort Laramie was a blur of green and pain. The Platte River was a promise, a silver ribbon that pulled them forward. Tawa rode the grulla, his body rigid, his hand pressed tight to his side where the bullet had torn through his shirt and skin. He had said it was a graze, but Evelyn watched him, her heart a cold stone. He was leaning more and more, his face a pale, gray mask under the grime. Little Hawk rode close to him, as if to hold him up by will alone. They saw the palisade of the fort at sundown on the 2nd day. It was a symbol of law, of order, of the federal power they had ridden 100 miles to find. It was a symbol of salvation. But as they rode through the main gate, weary, bloody, and covered in the dust of the canyon, they were not met by a marshal. They were met by a line of blue-coated soldiers, their rifles at the ready. And on the wide porch of the commandant's office, clean, shaved, and drinking a cup of coffee, stood Jasper Tabor. Beside him, his arm in a clean white sling, was Sheriff Silas Burke. "That's them, Captain," Silas said, his voice carrying in the quiet evening a voice of pure, reasonable authority. "That's the ones, the Comanche, Tawa, and the woman he abducted." A young, stiff officer with a shiny new badge on his chest stepped forward. He did not look at Evelyn. He looked at Tawa, his face a mask of cold disgust. "James Tawa," the captain said, his voice crisp. "You are under arrest by authority of the United States Army. You are charged with the abduction of Miss Evelyn Hart, the theft of a horse, and the attempted murder of a sworn officer of the law, Sheriff Silas Burke." "No," Evelyn cried, sliding from the mare, her legs weak. "No, you do not understand. He is the one. Burke is the criminal." "Please, Miss Hart," the captain said, a flicker of pity in his eyes. "We know you have been through a terrible ordeal. It is all right. You are safe now." He gestured. "Take the savage into custody, and take the woman to the mess hall. The judge is waiting to hear her testimony." "Testimony," Evelyn said, her mind reeling. They were in a trap. They had not been riding to salvation. They had been riding into the center of the web. The mess hall was hot, crowded, and smelled of boiled coffee and stale sweat. It had been turned into a makeshift courtroom. At the head table sat a man, older, with a weary, lined face and a shock of white hair. This was Judge Harlan, the circuit judge. The room was packed. Soldiers, trappers, teamsters, and a few worried-looking women from the fort's laundress row, all gathered to see the show. Tawa was shoved onto a bench, his hands bound. Little Hawk was gone, spirited away by the soldiers. Evelyn was given a chair, a courtesy for the victim. Silas Burke was already speaking. His voice was smooth, persuasive. He told a story of a simple, legal contract. He held up the telegraph flimsy, the one he had procured from the operator in red Ford. "It is right here, Your Honor. Bride confirmed for J. Tabor, clear as day. But this savage, Tawa, he got it in his head to keep her. He's been poisoning her mind, telling her lies." He pointed to his sling. "When I, as the law, went to retrieve her, he ambushed us. He and the woman, they set a rock slide on us. Your Honor, tried to kill us all in that canyon. I was shot in the arm. We were just lucky to get out alive." The crowd murmured. They looked at Tawa, a silent, bloody Comanche. His black hair matted. They looked at the clean-shaven sheriff. The story was simple. It was believable. Judge Harlan sighed. He looked at Tawa. "Mr. Tawa, you are a federal scout. I have seen your name on vouchers. This is a serious, serious charge. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Tawa sat, his back rigid. The pain in his side was a hot fire, but the pain in his heart was colder. The betrayal was complete. He looked at the white judge, the white soldiers, the white laws. He had sworn 15 years ago never to trust them. He had been a fool to break that vow. He said nothing. His silence was his only defense. It was his only pride. "Your Honor." Silas smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "I believe the woman would like to speak. I am sure she is ready to come home." Judge Harlan turned his weary eyes to Evelyn. "Miss Hart, you have been through a trauma. The captain says you are confused, but this is a court of law. Tell me, did this man," he pointed to Tawa, "take you against your will?" Evelyn stood. Her dress was ripped. Her hair was a tangled mess. Her hands were raw. She looked at Tawa, at his silent, proud, defeated profile. She looked at Silas Burke, at his confident smirk, and the fear, the exhaustion, the pain, it all burned away. It left behind a cold, clean, hard anger. "Yes," she said, her voice clear, ringing in the silent hall. "I am confused." Silas's smile widened. "I am confused, Your Honor," she continued, her voice rising, "as to why a man like Sheriff Burke is allowed to wear a badge when he should be in leg irons." The smirk vanished. "You say this is about a contract. Sheriff, a simple mistake of a name, you are right, but not that mistake." She reached into the bodice of her ruined dress. She pulled out the oilcloth-wrapped packet. She laid the mud-stained, water-warped ledger on the judge's table. "This is not about love, Your Honor. It is about arithmetic. It is about brokerage fees." She opened the book. She might have been a Boston teacher, reading from a primer. Her voice was steady, precise. "Entry, June 3rd. One girl, Hannah Kress, from St. Louis. Bond fee, $100. Paid, J. Tabor." She looked up, her eyes finding Tabor in the crowd. He had gone pale. "And here, Your Honor, a second column. Brokerage fee, $50. Paid to S. Burke. Entry, June 10th. One girl, Mary O'Shea, Irish, from Boston. Bond fee, $75. Brokerage fee, $50. Paid to S. Burke." The room was stone silent. You could hear a pin drop. "He is a slaver," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a low, terrible whisper. "He and Mr. Tabor, they are not buying wives. They are buying girls. They are buying labor. They are buying bodies. And Silas Burke is the broker." "That is a lie," Tabor roared from the back. "A filthy, forged lie." "Is it?" Evelyn's voice snapped like a whip. "You say they are happy brides. Sheriff, then where are they? Where is Hannah Kress? Where is Mary O'Shea?" She pulled another, smaller packet of letters from the oilcloth. "I have copies of letters to their families, letters that I collected." She held one up. "This is from Hannah Kress. He is not a rancher." She wrote to her sister in St. Louis. "This is a mine. We are not married. We are—" Evelyn's voice choked. She stopped, unable to read the last word. She did not have to. Every person in that room understood. She looked up, her eyes blazing, finding the few women who stood in the back, the laundresses, the officers' wives. "He is selling your sisters. He is trafficking in human misery. And he is using his badge to protect him. How many more, Sheriff? How many are buried at Tabor's ranch? How many are trapped in his mines?" A man in the back, an old, grizzled man in the worn blue uniform of a post rider, pushed his way forward. His face was pale. "Your Honor," he said, his voice a gravelly croak. "Your Honor, sir." "Who are you?" Judge Harlan asked, leaning forward, his eyes no longer weary. They were sharp as glass. "Ames, sir, Elias Ames. I was a post rider, out of Red Ford. Before that, I was cavalry." He pointed a trembling finger at the ledger. I carried packages for the sheriff to the bank in Fort Worth. He said they were land fees." He looked at the signature, at the column of S. Burke. "That's it," he whispered, as if to himself. "That's his hand. I've seen that signature on my pay vouchers for 20 years. That's Silas Burke's signature. She is telling the truth." It was a hammer blow. The crowd, which had been against Tawa, now turned, a low, animal growl, toward Burke. Silas saw it. He saw the judge's face. He saw the soldiers. He saw his world ending. He was a cornered rat, and he did what cornered rats do. He bit. He ripped his revolver from its holster. It is all a lie, a conspiracy. He was not aiming at Evelyn. He was not aiming at Tawa. He was aiming at the witness, at Elias Ames. "You old fool!" he screamed. It all happened in a single, terrible, frozen second. Tawa moved. He was not a man. He was a bolt of lightning. With his hands still bound, he launched himself sideways, a grunt of pure, agonizing effort, and he slammed his body into Judge Harlan, knocking the older man clear off his chair, shielding him with his own back. Silas's gun exploded, the hall filled with smoke and the smell of sulfur. The bullet went wild, shattering a lantern on the wall. Chaos, men yelled, women screamed. Evelyn did not scream. She acted. She saw the huge iron bell near the doorway, the one used to call the men to meals, the one used to signal a fire or an attack. She ran to it. She grabbed the thick, greasy rope, and she pulled, with all her strength, all her fear, all her rage. A deafening, frantic clang, clang, clang shattered the air, a sound of pure, mind-numbing alarm. The sound, and the gunshot, brought a flood of soldiers pouring in from the parade ground, their rifles leveled. The young captain, the bribed one, was at their head. He saw the scene. The judge, on the floor. The savage scout, Tawa, bleeding, on top of him. Silas Burke, his pistol still smoking. The bell, screaming alarm. The captain had a choice. He saw his own commander in the doorway, his face like thunder. He saw his career ending. He made his choice. "Disarm him!" he screamed, pointing at Silas. "Seize that man!" The soldiers, obedient to the uniform, piled onto Burke, wrenching the pistol from his hand. "And him!" the captain yelled, pointing at Jasper Tabor, who was trying to edge his way out a side door. "Get him! 2. Detain them both by order of the United States Army. An investigation is now open." The noise died. The shouting stopped. The bell, slowly, went silent. Tawa was still on the floor, a dead weight on the judge. "Mr. Tawa," the judge gasped from beneath him. "Son, you can get off me now." Tawa did not move. "Tawa," Evelyn whispered, her hand still on the bell rope. He pushed himself up, slowly, onto one arm. He looked at Evelyn. His face was white, his eyes wide with a strange, deep, sudden surprise. "Mindo," he whispered, a vow. He looked down at his own chest. The graze on his ribs was burning, but it was nothing. The lunge, the violent, twisting motion. It had been too much. The old wound, the one he had carried for 15 years, the one on his left shoulder, the one that held all his grief. It had torn open. It was not a graze, it was a flood. Blood, dark and arterial, was pouring from his shoulder, soaking his shirt, pooling on the floor. His old vow, and his new one, had ripped him apart. He looked at Evelyn, his gaze holding hers, and he fell. Not in a faint, he collapsed, a heavy, final fall, face down, in the spreading pool of his own blood. Evelyn was moving before he hit the floor. She shoved soldiers. She shoved the captain. She shoved the judge out of her way. She was on her knees, in the dirt, in the blood. In an instant. Tawa no. She grabbed his hand. It was already cool. She pressed it to her cheek. Tawa, James Tawa, do you hear me? She cried, her voice tearing. You do not get to leave. Stay with me. Stay with me. The judge was yelling for a doctor. The soldiers were dragging a cursing, spitting Silas Burke from the hall. Little Hawk was suddenly there, his face a mask of tears. But Evelyn saw none of it. She held his hand, his bound, bloody hand. She held it as if she could pour her own life, her own stubborn, angry life, into his. I am here, she whispered, the words a promise, a chain, an anchor. I am here. And then, a new sound, a soft, gentle sound, like a brush on a drum. It grew, a patter, a drumming, a steady, driving, relentless rhythm on the tin roof of the mess hall. The first rain of the season had come. It was washing the dust from the fort. It was washing the blood from the ground. It was a baptism. The night was a long, cold breath. In the fort's infirmary, a single lantern burned against the driving rain. Tawa was on a cot, his skin a pale, waxy gray. The army doctor, a man weary from a long career of patching up bullet holes, was just finishing. I have done what I can, the doctor said, his voice low, his hands bloody. He was speaking to Evelyn, who stood, a silent sentinel, beside the cot. The ball missed his heart 15 years ago, but the scar tissue, it was a mess. His lunge in the courtroom, it tore everything. He is bleeding inside and out. It is in God's hands now. Evelyn's hand, raw and scraped, closed over Tawa's. His hand was cold. She had seen him as a stone, as a fire. Now, he was just a man, and he was dying. Judge Harlan was in the corner, his face grim, talking to the post rider, Elias Ames. Little Hawk sat on the floor, his arms wrapped around his knees, his eyes fixed on Tawa. The storm was a war outside. Thunder cracked, and the rain was a solid wall of water against the windows. Then, a new sound. Not thunder, gunshots. Close. A soldier, a boy of no more than 19, burst through the infirmary door, his face white with terror, rain sluicing from his cap. It's the sheriff! It's Burke! He screamed. He got free, a man in the crowd. He started a diversion at the jail. He's got men, maybe 4 or 5. They're at the main gate. They've set the supply shed on fire. They're coming for the judge. The fort, a symbol of order, had become a prison. They were under siege. Bar the door, the doctor yelled, his weariness gone, replaced by a soldier's command. He wants the witnesses, he wants the ledger. The few able-bodied soldiers in the room, wounded men, grabbed their rifles, but it was the women who moved first. The laundresses, the officers' wives, women who had been cowering in the back, their faces pale, now moved with a cold, desperate fury. They grabbed beds, tables, chests, and began to barricade the doors and windows. Evelyn was with them. Her grief for Tawa turned in an instant to a white-hot, protective rage. And they were not alone. The door burst open again, and for a second, Evelyn thought the attackers were in, but it was the Comanche women, the ones who had given her the charm. They had been in the trade camp outside the fort. They had heard the alarm, had seen the fire. They moved into the room, silent, armed with knives and a fierce, protective stillness. They did not barricade. They took positions in the shadows, by the windows, their eyes on the door. They had come for their own. Then, A new figure stumbled in, soaked, pale, and shaking. It was Reverend Miles. He had arrived on a late-stage coach, having ridden from Red Ford as if chased by the devil, which, in a way, he was. "Judge Harlan!" he gasped, clutching his own black-bound book, the Red Ford marriage ledger. I was a coward. I let them use my church." He fumbled the book open, his finger tracing a line. Here Jasper Tabor's name. But her signature, Miss Hart's, it is blank. She never signed. She never consented. The contract, it was never sealed. He never owned her, not even by his own corrupt laws. He had brought the final nail for Tabor's coffin. But the coffin was not yet built. A volley of shots shattered the new window barricade. "They are on the porch!" a soldier yelled. Smoke, acrid and oily, began to seep under the main door. They were trying to burn them out. Evelyn grabbed a Spencer rifle from the cot of a man who would never use it again. She was not a teacher. She was not a victim. She was a woman in a box, and she would fight her way out. Tawa's eyes snapped open. He did not wake slowly. He was in darkness, and then he was awake. He smelled the rain. He smelled the smoke. He heard the gunfire. And he saw Evelyn. She was not by his side. She was across the room, by the door, the rifle in her hands. Her face a pale, smudged, beautiful mask of defiance. She was not crying for him. She was fighting for him. He sat up. The world went white. The pain was not a graze, not a burn. It was a spear. It was a mountain. He gritted his teeth, the sound a low growl in his chest. "Son," the doctor said, rushing over. "Lie down. You are killing yourself. Your wound is open." Tawa looked at the doctor. He put a hand on the man's chest and shoved. Not with anger, but with a terrible, final strength. "I have a vow to keep," he said, his voice a rasp. He stood. The room spun, but he held it. He was a warrior. He was a stone. He was a man with a new promise. He looked at Evelyn. A long, final look. Then he turned to the back door, the one that led to the stables. He took the rifle from the wounded soldier. "Where are you going?" Evelyn cried, seeing him. "Tawa, you cannot—" "He wants the book," Tawa said, his voice already sounding distant, as if from the canyon. "He wants the witnesses. I will lead him away." "No, I will not let you. You cannot stop me." He said he was gone, into the stable, into the storm. He found an old cavalry horse, a big gray, already saddled, nervous from the storm. He mounted. The movement was a fire that threatened to burn him to ash, but he held on. He rode out of the stable, not toward the front, but into the parade ground, a single, ghostly figure in the driving rain. "Burke!" His voice was not a yell. It was a roar, a sound from the earth. "Silas Burke, you are a coward. You fight women." The shooting at the infirmary door stopped. "I have the ledger. Burke," Tawa roared, lying. "The book, the one you want, come and get it." He fired the Spencer into the air, a single clear shot that cut through the thunder. He saw them. 5 men, shadows, breaking from the infirmary porch. They saw him, a lone Comanche on a gray horse, a perfect target. "Get him!" Burke's voice screamed, full of hate. "He has the book, kill him!" Tawa wheeled the horse. He was not a scout now. He was a shepherd, and he was leading the wolves away from the fold. He rode for the river. He led them to the old, rickety supply bridge that crossed the Platte. The river was no longer a river. It was a monster, a muddy, churning, roaring flood, logs and debris smashing in the black water. Tawa did not hesitate. He plunged the horse onto the bridge. The gray's hooves slipped on the slick, wet wood. The bridge groaned, swaying in the wind. He made it to the other side. He turned, the rifle in his hands. "Come on, Sheriff," he yelled, his voice carrying over the wind. "Come and claim your property." Burke and his 4 men were at the other end. They were not fools. They hesitated. "He's wounded!" Burke screamed. "He's 1 man, get him!" They spurred their horses onto the bridge. It was a charge. Tawa did not fire. He waited. The bridge was not built for this. Not for 5 charging men, not in a flood. The wood, slick with rain and mud, was treacherous. A horse went down. A man screamed. He was gone, into the black water. Tawa raised his rifle. "Burke!" Burke was in the middle of the bridge, his horse screaming, trying to keep its footing. The other men were in chaos. "You sell people to buy the law." "Burke," Tawa said, his voice low, but it cut through the storm. "This is my law!" Burke screamed, raising his pistol, trying to aim. "I keep the law," Tawa said, "by not selling my soul." The bridge, tortured by the flood, by the weight, by the panic, gave a groan, a sound of a dying giant. The main timber split. The world fell apart. Horses, men, wood, all of it, collapsed into the raging black water. Tawa watched, his face granite. The men were gone, just gone. But then, a shape, a man, clinging to a broken piece of the trestle, being swept toward the bank where Tawa stood. It was Silas. His gun was gone. His men were gone. He was just a man, his eyes white with the terror of death. Tawa looked at him. He saw the face of the man who had tried to kill him, to enslave Evelyn, to murder a boy. He saw the face of the man who had brought all this pain, and he remembered his vow, the new one. Protect the innocent. Protect yourself. He knelt. He was on the muddy bank, his shoulder a screaming fire. He reached out his hand, his good, strong, right hand. "Burke," he yelled. "Take my hand, take it." Silas was 10 feet away. 5 feet, he saw the hand. He saw the Comanche, the man he had despised, the savage, offering him life. He saw the truth, that he was beaten, that he would have to live, owing his life, his breath, to this man. He saw the new world, a world where Tawa was a hero, and he was a prisoner. His face, in the dim watery light of the moon that was now breaking through the clouds, twisted. It was not gratitude. It was a final, all-consuming hatred. He would not be saved. "To hell with you!" Silas screamed. He raised his arm. He had one last trick, a small pistol, a derringer, from his boot. He tried to aim it, to fire it, to make one last, bitter kill. But the water was too fast. The gun, wet and useless, slipped from his grasp. Or perhaps he never had it. Perhaps it was just the gesture. He made a choice. He let go of the timber. He pushed himself away from the bank, away from the offered hand, and the flood, the cold, black, righteous water, took him. He was gone in an instant, a final, self-inflicted judgment. The rain, as if a switch had been thrown, began to ease. It became a drizzle, then a mist. Tawa was left alone, kneeling in the mud, his hand outstretched, empty. He was still there, a silhouette against the rising mist. When Evelyn found him, the siege at the fort was broken. Tabor and the last of Burke's men were in irons. The judge, safe, was already in the telegraph office, sending a wire to Fort Worth. Indict Atlantic matrimonials. All charges. Federal warrant. Evelyn walked to Tawa. She did not run. She walked. He was slumped, exhausted, his body finally giving up. But he was alive. She came to him, not as a victim, not as a nurse. She came to him as an equal. She put her shoulder under his good arm. "Come, Tawa," she said, her voice soft. "Let's go home." He leaned on her. He let her take his weight. They stood for a long, long moment on the bank of the river, breathing. The storm was over. The late moon was a thin, clean sliver, a promise. Judge Harlan found them there. He looked at the broken bridge. He looked at the two of them, a strange, battered, but beautiful pair. "Son," he said to Tawa, his voice full of a new respect, "you have a knack for this. When you are healed, this territory needs a new head of scouts, a federal man. I want you." He then looked at Evelyn, at her clear, strong eyes. "And this whole community needs a new start. A school, a real post office, one that serves the people. Not men like Tabor." He looked at them both, the seed of an idea, of a future, planted in the wet, clean earth. "I am going to need good, strong people to help me build it." It was a 3-day journey back to Red Ford, but not a ride. Tawa was on a cot, secured in the back of a canvas-topped supply wagon, courtesy of Judge Harlan. The army doctor had declared him unfit to sit a horse for at least a month, the words a bitter pill for Tawa to swallow. Evelyn sat beside the cot, changing his bandages, which were thick and stained with the carbolic and his blood. His face was a pale, chiseled gray, his eyes closed most of the time, but he was alive. Little Hawk rode the grulla alongside the wagon, his face a mask of new, grim importance. They were escorted by Elias Ames, the old post rider, and 2 soldiers. They were not prisoners. They were heroes. But it did not feel like victory. It felt like exhaustion. When the wagon rolled into the main street of Red Ford, the town was silent. People came out, one by one, from the mercantile, from the saloon, from the blacksmith's forge. They did not cheer. The news had traveled fast, carried on the telegraph wire that had once been a tool for Silas Burke. They had heard of the shootout, of the death of the sheriff, of the arrest of Jasper Tabor. Abernathy was the first to approach, his hat in his hands. He looked at Evelyn, then at the pale, wounded man in the wagon. His face was a mixture of awe and terror. "Miss Hart," he stammered. We did not know." Mrs. Gable, the blacksmith's wife, pushed past him. She was carrying a jar of broth. She did not speak to Abernathy. She spoke to Evelyn, woman to woman. "You bring him to my house," she said, her voice a command. "The doctor at the fort sent instructions by wire. My spare room is clean. He will be safe there." And so, Tawa, the man who had lived on the edge of the town, a shadow, an outsider, was carried into the very heart of it. He was laid in a soft bed, in a clean room, while the women of the town, the same ones who had whispered, now brought food, clean linen, and quiet support. Evelyn stayed by his side for the first week, a long, fevered blur. She slept in a chair, her hand on his, feeling for the slow, steady beat of his pulse. He thrashed, his dreams full of water and gunfire, his voice calling out a name, but not hers, a name she did not know. On the 8th day, he woke, his eyes clear for the first time. The fever was gone. He looked at her tired, smudged face. "You are a bad scout," she whispered, a small, weary smile touching her lips. "You were supposed to be the shadow." He looked at his hand, which was in hers. He did not pull it away. "The shadow got loud," he rasped. Red Ford was a different town. The air was cleaner. Jasper Tabor was gone, sent by federal marshals to Cheyenne for a trial that was, by all accounts, a simple formality. The telegraph wire chattered with new, official business. The message came from Fort Laramie, a formal document pinned for all to see. The warrant for Silas Burke, for abduction and attempted murder, was officially rescinded. It was replaced by a simple 3-word death certificate, deceased by drowning. Abernathy, his courage returned tenfold, had taken down the old hateful sign. He had replaced it with a new one, painted in fresh, bold letters, nailed to the front of the post office. It did not say United States Mail. It said, "No one is property." When Tawa was well enough to walk, his arm in a sling, his side tightly bound, he did not go to the horse shed. He walked, his steps slow but steady, south toward the Comanche camp. Evelyn walked with him, as did Little Hawk. The grandmother who had given Evelyn the charm was waiting. She and the other women had prepared. Tawa stood before them, and for a long time, he just stood. He was not a warrior. He was not a scout. He was a man, paying a debt to the past. The women began a low, soft chant. They built a small fire, not of mesquite, but of sweet, fragrant herbs. They were not mourning. They were releasing. Tawa, his face unreadable, took a small, leather-bound pouch from his own shirt. He held it over the fire, his hand shaking, not from weakness, but from emotion. He held it for a long minute, then let it drop. It was a lock of hair, tied with a dried flower. He was setting his first wife's spirit free. He was setting himself free. Evelyn did not intrude. She did not offer comfort. She stood a dozen yards back with Little Hawk, her hands clasped. She was not a part of that past. She was a witness. She was honoring the woman who had died, the woman whose name he had called in his fever. She was letting him have his grief, pure and untouched. When it was over, he walked back to her. The sun was setting. He did not look like a man who had lost something. He looked like a man who had finally put down a heavy, heavy load. That night, the town held a meeting. It was not in the church. It was in the open, by the town pump. Judge Harlan had sent word, and the town was ready to answer. Tawa stood, his voice still rough, but clear. He looked at Mrs. Gable, at Abernathy, at the blacksmith. "When I came here," he said, "I was a ghost. You did not see me. I did not see you. We were not a community. We were just people, in the same dust." He took a breath. "You took me in. You cared for me. You, Mrs. Gable. You, Abernathy. You held the line." He nodded to the new sign. This is a good vow. A good Mindo." He was thanking them, in his own sparse way. Mrs. Gable stepped forward. Her face, usually hard from the forge, was soft. "Mr. Tawa," she said, her voice thick. We were blind. We let a snake like Burke tell us what the law was. We let him tell us who was human and who was not." She looked at the assembled crowd. "No more. The judge is right. The law. It is not a club to beat the weak. It must be a shield. For all of us. For our children." She looked at Evelyn. "For all our children." The town had made its promise. The next week, the stage came, and with it, a letter for Evelyn. It was from a Boston newspaper, a rival of her old editor. They had heard of her, of the Red Ford slaver. They offered her a job, a byline, a train ticket back east. Tawa saw her reading it by the light of the stone shed. He had moved back, his wounds mostly healed, but the town would not let him live alone. They brought him food. The blacksmith had mended his roof. "You are leaving," he said. It was not a question. She folded the letter. "It is everything I thought I wanted," she said, her voice quiet. "A name, a place, a chance to write the truth." "It is a good offer," he said, his face a mask. He turned to go. "I am not taking it," she said. He stopped. He turned back. "Why, it is your world." "No," she said, and she touched the cedar charm at her throat, which she had never taken off. "It is not my world. My world is full of books, but it is not real. This is real. The dust, the work, the children." She looked at him, her eyes clear in the moonlight. "Mrs. Gable has 2 daughters. Little Hawk has no one. The Comanche children, they have no books. They have no place in this new world. I am a teacher. Tawa, I was not lying about that. I want to build a school, the one the judge spoke of, for all of them." He was silent for a long time, the only sound the crickets and the soft stamp of the grulla in the stall. "A school," he said, "needs a roof." "Yes," she said. "My dugout," he said. "It is small, but the stone is good." She looked at him, confused. I am the Federal Scout now. Head of Scouts, the fort. They are building me a house. A real house. With wood." He seemed embarrassed by this. "The dugout, it is empty." He took a step closer. The line he had drawn in the dust, so long ago, was still there. Faint, but visible. "It is not a contract," he said, his voice low, intense. "There is no paper. There is no bargain. There is no owing. It is a place. If you choose." He was offering her a home. His first home. He was inviting her to stay. Not as a wife, not as property, as a free woman. She stepped over the line. "I will need help," she whispered. "Repairing the roof." He did not touch her then. He only nodded. I will help." But a few nights later, after the lumber for the new school had been delivered, after the children, Comanche, Ute, and White, had already begun to call her teacher, he came to her. He was on the grulla, and he was leading the sorrel mare. "Come," he said. "Where?" "To see the world," he said. He led her out of the town, away from the lights, away from the sounds. He led her up onto the high prairie, the Llano Estacado, the place the wind was born. The moon was a full, bright silver, washing the world in light. They sat on a bluff, a blanket spread, the horses grazing peacefully behind them. The land stretched out, endless, silver and black. "This," he said, his voice full of a feeling she had never heard from him. "This is my church. This is the place where I lost her." She knew, in that moment, that he was giving her the last piece of himself, the truth. "And this," he said, his voice softer, "is the place I found myself again." He looked at her, and his eyes were not full of the past. They were full of the now. You are not a shadow. Evelyn, you are the fire." He reached out, his hand, the one she had held, the one that was scarred, the one that was so strong, and he touched her face. He touched the line of her jaw. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. "I am not afraid," she whispered. "Neither am I," he said. He kissed her. It was not the kiss of the storm, a desperate clinging in the dark. It was not a kiss of passion, of fire. It was a kiss of peace. It was a kiss of promise. It was slow, and it was sure. It tasted of the wind, and of salt, and of a shared, hard-won future. They did not speak for a long time. They just held hands, looking at the stars, a million bright, sharp points in the endless sky. Later, in the first light of the new schoolhouse, a single room built of new pine and old stone, Evelyn took the cedar charm from her neck. She hung it on its leather thong from a nail, right next to the bright new chart of the alphabet she had just painted. The A and the B and the C, the old and the new, a promise. 1 year, it passed, not in a rush, but with the steady, turning pace of the seasons on the high plains. The wind still blew, but it did not sound so angry. The dust still rose, but it settled in new, different patterns. Redford was not the same town. The raw, jagged edges had been scoured, not by the storm, but by the truth. The school was the first sign. It was not a dugout, and it was not a shed. It was a proper building, made of stone from the canyon and new pine from the fort. It stood at the edge of town, a solid, single room that smelled of sawdust, chalk, and cedar. Inside, Evelyn Hart, who the town simply called Teacher, ran her world. Her students were a strange and beautiful mix. The Gable girls sat next to Little Hawk, who was now Tawa's ward and learning his letters with a fierce, silent intensity. 2 young boys from the Comanche camp rode in every morning, their long hair tied back, their minds sharp as new knives, learning the white man's words as a hunter learns new tracks. Even Reverend Miles, his face humbled, had enrolled his own nephew. There was a waiting list. The second sign was Tawa's horse camp. It was no longer just his private stable. It had become a post, a real trading post, run on a new principle. He was the head of the Federal Scouts, a position that gave him authority, a new, clean uniform he rarely wore, and a real house by the fort. But his heart was at the old camp. The Comanche, the Ute, the Arapaho, they came to him. They did not come to the fort or to the mercantile, which they still did not trust. They came to Tawa. They brought their finely tanned hides and their beadwork. Tawa traded for them, at fair prices. He did not take a broker's fee. He took what was just. He traded their goods for flour, sugar, and steel knives, ensuring the white man's scales were balanced. The violence that had so often sparked at the edges of Red Ford, the cheap whiskey trades and the stolen horses, began to die. There was a new law. It was not a law of paper. It was a law of respect. And then there was Tawa and Evelyn. The town watched them, at first with a sharp, frontier curiosity, and then with a quiet, simple acceptance. There was no hurried wedding, no piece of paper from Reverend Miles, no contract. They had seen what contracts were worth. They were simply Tawa and Evelyn. When they were in town, at the mercantile or at the town council meetings, he called her Miss Hart. She called him Mr. Tawa. It was a formal, public respect. But in the quiet of the evenings, when they walked on the prairie, or sat in the new solid house he had built, they called each other partner. It was a word that held more weight than husband or wife. It was a word that meant you carried your own load, and you carried it alongside the other. They were a family of 2, plus a boy, a world built on the foundations of the old one. They respected each other's spaces, his of the plains and the horses, hers of the books and the ink, and they had built a bridge between them, solid as stone. Justice, it turned out, did not stop at the Platte River. One afternoon, Elias Ames, the old post rider, rode in on the stage, his face flushed with a rare, excited grin. He was carrying a newspaper, not from Boston, but from Cheyenne. He unfolded it with trembling hands. There, on the front page, was an article. The byline was not "A Boston Assistant." It was by Evelyn Hart. The headline was stark. "The Cattle King and the Bride Broker, How Atlantic Matrimonials Enslaved a Generation." It was her story. It was all of it. The names, the dates, the ledger, the story of Hannah Kress and Mary O'Shea. It was a cold, clean, surgical piece of writing, not of emotion, but of fact, and it was devastating. The story was carried by telegraph to Denver, to St. Louis, to New York. Within a month, Atlantic Matrimonials was bankrupt, its owners indicted on federal charges. The article was a sensation. Other women who had been trapped, found their courage. They came forward, their own letters, their own stories, a flood that washed the whole corrupt system away. Evelyn Hart, the teacher in a one-room schoolhouse on the plains, had rescued hundreds of women she would never meet. The railroad, that great iron snake, was still coming. It had been delayed by the trial, by the scandal, but it was coming. The first survey crew, a new crew, arrived in Red Ford. But this time, they were not met by a corrupt sheriff. They were met by a town council. The meeting was held in the schoolhouse, and at the table sat Mrs. Gable and Abernathy, and the blacksmith, and Reverend Miles. And at the head of the table, in the seat reserved for the town's representative, sat Tawa. He was not just a scout. He was not an outsider. He was a founder. He sat, his arms crossed, his face carved of stone, and he listened. When the railroad man, a fast talker from Chicago, spoke of compulsory land purchases and native territories. Tawa simply held up a hand. "This is not your land to purchase," Tawa said, his voice quiet, but it filled the room. "And this is not our land to sell. This is a community. You will deal with us, all of us, or your railroad will find another, harder path." The man from Chicago, seeing the faces in that room, the hard-eyed blacksmith, the fierce-eyed teacher, the Comanche scout who was a federal officer, knew, in that instant, that this was not Red Ford. This was a new place, and the old rules did not apply. The community had found its voice. That night, Tawa was in the new house. It was a good house. Solid. Warm. The rain did not come in. He was unpacking the last of his things from the dugout, which was now, officially, the schoolhouse's library. He held something in his hand, the buffalo horns, the memorial, the things he had told her not to touch. He looked at them, at the smooth, gray curve of the bone. He thought of the woman who had died, the life that had been stolen. He did not feel the old, cold rage. He felt a quiet, a peace. He hung them, high on the new pine wall, over the fireplace, a place of honor. Evelyn came in, quiet. She was holding something. It was a piece of glass, in a dark frame, a photograph, a new, modern magic. A man had come through from Fort Laramie, with a camera and a box. "A gift," she said. "From the children. They paid for it with their lessons." She handed it to him. It was a picture of her class. There they were, all of them. The Gable girls, their hair in stiff braids. The Comanche boys, their faces proud, unsmiling. And in the middle, looking small and fierce, was Little Hawk, holding a book. They were a new tribe. Tawa looked at the picture. He looked at the horns. He took the photograph from her, and he hung it on the wall. Not next to the horns, but directly, respectfully, underneath them. The past, the present, together on the same wall. This is how we keep the frontier," Evelyn whispered, her hand finding his. "Not with guns, not with contracts." Tawa looked at the picture of the children. He looked at the horns. He thought of the long, cold 15 years, and the one, loud, vibrant year that had followed. He put his good arm around her. "No," he said, his voice a low, sure promise. "We will keep it with kindness." The sun began to set. The same, eternal prairie sunset. It lit the new, clean windows of the schoolhouse, turning them to fire. It painted the high plains in colors of blood and rust and gold. On the edge of town, a small, bright flag, the one the soldiers had given the school, snapped in the evening breeze. Around it, a group of children were playing, their game a loud, happy mix of shouting. Their voices, English and Comanche, rose in the clean air. From the south, faint but steady, came the sound of the drums from the Allied camp, a heartbeat in the earth. And from the schoolhouse, Evelyn, who was checking the blackboard for the next day's lessons, rang the small iron bell, signaling that the day was truly, finally, done. The bell and the drum. A new song. A new peace. Freedom, Tawa knew, was not something you were given or something you could sell. It was something you built, one stone, one good deed, at a time, and love. Love was not something you bought from a catalog. It was not a contract. It was something you earned. You earned it, every day, with every sunrise, with every single act of decency. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I truly appreciate you spending this time with us. Let me know where in the world you are listening from in the comments below. I would love to connect and share our thoughts. Please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales, and if you enjoyed this journey, like this video. And support it by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.